October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and purple represents the color for domestic violence. But along with domestic violence, the color purple also reminds me of something else, which ironically also has a message about domestic violence.
What?
I'm gonna join Morris's group.
I've spent years trying to figure out exactly what is purple rain, and perhaps it really is advocacy for domestic violence awareness. But does domestic violence really need advocacy? Well, yes. People are generally aware that you're not supposed to bash a woman over the head. But the point of domestic violence awareness is not to teach people that they're not supposed to bash a woman over the head. It's about teaching people that if a man does in fact bash a woman over the head, not to blame her for it, and the ways to help her get out of that relationship. This seems simple enough not to blame the woman, but apparently people don't really get that either. Anyone heard this story before? So, like any abusive relationship, despite obvious physical abuse, the woman goes back. Why? Well, Purple Rain outlines these reasons step for step. In the opening of the movie, we are introduced to Apollonia, a 19-year-old aspiring singer who is clearly very sexually attracted to Prince. Wait, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, this would seem simple enough. And although she appears to be involved with the hypersexualized images of the 80s, you can still kind of tell she has values. So this attraction she feels is already in conflict with some of her core beliefs, and like a good girl, she should be waiting for marriage. This is something an abuser could quickly pick up on and use to his advantage. So in the first conversation Apollonia has with Prince, he immediately starts playing head games, after which, because of this sexual attraction, she goes off riding with him on his motorcycle into the woods. Again, the implied sexuality of the situation can spark that guilt inside Apollonia because she was raised a church girl. Then Prince plays on that guilt by saying something about purifying yourself in the waters of Lake Minnetonka. This implies a baptism of some sort, which sounds familiar and appeals to the values she is in conflict over. Apollonia falls for this, and in a mixture of expressing her sexual attraction to Prince as well as her guilt over these feelings, takes off her clothes and jumps into the lake to purify herself. Which of course is not Lake Minnetonka. So after pulling this cruel joke, Prince drives off to abandon her like the whore that she is. But then he immediately redeems himself by coming back to her rescue. This does two things. It conditions her to continue to internalize the guilt over the situation. After all, she made a few poor choices on her own. And two, it conditions her to look to Prince as her redeemer, even if he initiates the conflict. She faced possibly being abandoned in the middle of nowhere, and even though Prince had brought her out there and threatened to leave, by coming back he becomes both the hand that condemns as well as the hand that feeds her. She is now trained that after experiencing abuse from the abuser, to come back to her abuser for comfort. So this was the grooming stage of the abusive relationship, because it is not really about hitting somebody, it's about power and control. And so the abuser establishes control by making the victim doubt her own abilities and need to seek solace from the abuser. But aside from head games and capitalizing on guilt, there's a natural charm of an abuser that draws the victim in. Yeah, there are other suitors, but they don't really appeal to that same level of passion that he has. They don't have the same boldness or vulnerability in expressing how he feels about you. And this is my favorite song on the album. So people don't always understand that aspect of why a woman will stay in an abusive relationship. It is because they are in that honeymoon phase. And when they're in that honeymoon phase, it's good. I mean, really good. But then, of course, it descends into this. But it's still hard for people to show compassion to a victim because all the grooming and sex couldn't possibly be enough to keep returning to this. But let's say she does get the chutzpah to leave. What type of outside help would she get? Apollonia is unemployed and alone in a new town with no close friends or relatives. Seeking out shelter would mean having to put aside her dreams of becoming a singer and leave First Avenue, which is the exact reason she came. People also look down upon becoming a singer as an ambition in life, and she would be very unlikely to find any compassion from anybody because of slut shaming. So her boyfriend physically assaulted her. Why didn't she just call the police and file charges? Well, that's not as straightforward as it seems. So after Prince slaps Apollonia, she gets up and leaves. She does the very thing that most people complain that abused women won't do. So say after she gets home, she calls the police. Now, because she has left the scene of the crime, when the police arrive, they will arrive at her house. At best, the police can file a report, and maybe the magistrate will issue an arrest warrant, but it will be difficult to do without the police actually witnessing the crime taking place. Bruises can take days to appear, if any at all. Then the fact that she is not standing in a room with her attacker at the time of police arrival means that she was no longer in an active crime scene. Had she stayed in the house after Prince slapped her, the very irony of staying with an abuser, the police could have done more due to the fact that it would be considered an active crime scene and the police would be eyewitnesses. An arrest would be more justifiable on the spot. However, because she left, talking to the police could easily descend into insufficient evidence or the police claiming that this was just a civil matter and she'd have to take it up in court. Now let's analyze the second time Prince physically assaulted Apollonia and how that would play out in court. Now, in court, the plaintiff doesn't have a narrative film to show the judge like us, the viewer, watching the movie. They can only rely on eyewitnesses' accounts, and usually in domestic violence cases, it's he said, she said. Therefore, the eyewitness account of the victim is already under scrutiny because her testimony is in favor of her side of the story. Even watching this incident in the narrative, it appears that Apollonia initiated the physical violence. She hit him, and he pushed her back. Was it really his fault that he was able to exert a greater physical force only after striking, after being struck first? But look closer. Prince did hit her first when he slapped the bottle out of her hand. Striking something that is attached to another person counts as an assault on that person. It's like kicking someone's cane. It's still an assault on the person. You can't just say that I didn't really assault you because it was only your cane that I kicked. So Prince did in fact initiate the physical confrontation. But if that was so hard to ascertain with a video, how much harder would it be to convey with just the she said testimony of Apollonia? The defense attorney is going to tear through everything she did because the goal of the attorney is not to find out the truth or preserve the integrity of the law. It is to get his client off. So the defense attorney is going to harp on the fact that she hit Prince regardless of the fact that it was self-defense. Then the defense attorney will attack her character. Were you drinking the night in question? Yes. So how accurate can your recollection of the events be? What were you doing before the alleged incident of violence? Dancing half naked in a club? Yeah, that should go over well with presenting Apollonia as an innocent victim. On this same night that Prince allegedly also hit Morris Day, did you willingly go ride with him? Well, there was this wall and, ma'am, could you just answer yes or no? Yes. Were you in any way intimate with Prince before the alleged incident of physical violence? We were kissing, but thank you, that's all I need. So after a grueling examination of the details of the victim's personal life and actions before the event, and then having to relive a traumatic experience over and over again, seeking any justice from the courtroom becomes a more daunting task than just ignoring the abuse. Then, after the defense attorney's betrayal of Apollonia as a vindictive woman who struck her boyfriend in anger, and then exaggerated accounts of physical violence from him for revenge, and having no other proof of abuse outside of what she said, the judge would likely dismiss the case or side with the defendant. Not to mention that it'd be unlikely this case would even reach a courtroom due to the fact that victims are justifiably intimidated by taking their abuser to court. And mounting a legal defense is not cheap. Remember, Apollonia is unemployed, and whatever money she has in her pocket is all she has to last her until she actually secures a job in a new town where she has no close friends or relatives to help her. Then, due to the grooming and honeymoon phase, she's unlikely to call the police because of her own guilt that she's internalized, blaming herself for the abuse. So the only thing to do now is to continue with the cycle of abuse and move on to the reconciliation phase. This is when the abuser apologizes for his behavior and the victim returns to her abuser. We see this in Purple Rain with the performance of Purple Rain. It's a song that sort of implies that Prince is sorry about some of the things he's done and wants Apollonia back. The song has religious undertones, which again appeals to the sense of value she has. He then goes on to perform a song declaring that he would die for her, which also mirrors the values that she believes in. Also, the song Purple Rain is meant as an apology to his bandmates, who Prince had also been abusive towards.
I'm not gonna do your stupid music.
This change of heart occurred after a series of personal lows for Prince, who was noticing that he was becoming his father, who was also an abuser. Another thing about the cycle of abuse is that males who grow up in abusive homes also grow up to repeat the pattern and are twice as likely to become abusers. Perhaps Purple Rain stands for the purple that represents freedom from abuse, and as Prince sings the song, he's aware that abusers always apologize but revert back to abuse. And maybe Purple Rain represents making an apology that's just not part of the cycle, but a genuine turnaround. It can be very hard to tell if someone's really genuine, knowing how much abusers will go through that same routine. But Purple Rain could be that he sees all that, but is choosing not to go down that path. Or not. But also, these are fictional characters. Although these fictional characters are playing themselves for some reason, this was really confusing to me as a kid. The movie Purple Rain can actually be an educational tool to see how a woman can fall into an abusive relationship and a difficulty getting out psychologically. So perhaps people can show more compassion for victims and do something for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Domestic Violence Awareness Month is not about teaching people not to bash women over the head. Everybody knows that's wrong. It's about teaching people to understand the depths of abuse and why it's difficult for a woman to get out of abuse. Perhaps when more people understand that, there'll be more of a social movement to challenge how domestic violence is handled in the court system and improve how victims are treated. So, help join the fight against domestic violence. Donate or volunteer at your local agency and lead the Purple Rain.